The alien empire destroyed Earth's fleet. Then, humanity made its final move. The stars near the Vareth system burned cold and silent, and into that silence came the largest fleet Earth had ever built. 300 warships moved together in tight formation, their engines glowing blue against the dark. At the front of this fleet was the flagship Resolute, a mile-long vessel of steel and hope, carrying the best officers humanity had ever trained. On its bridge stood Fleet Admiral Elena Voss, a woman with gray eyes and a calm voice, watching the stars ahead. For 30 years, Earth had known about the Krythar Dominion. The Dominion was an empire that stretched across 100 star systems, built on conquest and control. Every species it met, it either destroyed or enslaved. The Krythar were tall, gray-skinned beings with 4 eyes and cold logic. They did not believe in mercy. They believed in order, and to them, order meant obedience. When they had first found the small, 3-eyed creatures called the Doven, living on a quiet world near Vareth, they gave them a simple choice: submit or die. The Doven chose to fight, and so Earth, their only ally in the galaxy, decided to help them. That decision now led 300 human ships to the edge of Krythar space. "Sensors are clean, Admiral," said Commander Ray Torres, a broad-shouldered man standing at the tactical station. "No enemy signatures within 10 light minutes." Elena nodded slowly. Something about the quiet did not feel right. The Krythar were not a species that waited quietly. They struck fast and hard, using their superior numbers and technology to crush resistance before it could grow. If this system was truly empty, it meant one of two things. Either the Dominion had abandoned the Doven world, or they were waiting somewhere Earth's sensors could not see. "Send a probe ahead," Elena ordered. "Full stealth profile." Ray tapped at his console, and a small silver drone shot off from the Resolute, vanishing into the black. 10 minutes passed, then the drone's signal died. "Admiral, we lost contact," Ray said, his voice tightening. Elena felt her stomach drop. She had commanded fleets for over a decade, and she knew the shape of a trap when she saw one, even if she could not see it yet. All ships, defensive formation. Charge weapons, now. But it was already too late. Space itself seemed to tear open around the fleet. Krythar ships did not fly through space the way human ships did. They folded distance, appearing instantly where they wished to be. In one breath, the Resolute and its escorts were alone in the void. In the next, they were surrounded by nearly 1,000 Krythar warships, each one twice the size of the largest human vessel. "Enemy contacts. Everywhere, Admiral. We're surrounded," Ray shouted, his hands flying across the console. Elena's mind raced through every training scenario she had ever studied, but none of them had prepared her for 1,000 ships appearing from nothing. The Krythar had lied about their numbers for years, hiding their true strength behind smaller raiding parties. This was not a battle. This was an execution. "All ships, retreat pattern Delta, get the fleet out of here." Elena's voice was sharp, but steady. She would not let her people see fear. The order came too late for many. Krythar beams, thick lines of burning green energy, tore through the human formation. The destroyer Hammersmith vanished in a flash of light, its 300 crew gone in a heartbeat. The cruiser Pioneer took a direct hit to its engine core and began to spin, venting atmosphere into space, as tiny figures, people, were thrown out into the vacuum. "Admiral, the Pioneer is gone. Sheridan is losing power. We're taking heavy fire on the port side." Ray's voice cracked as he read off the damage reports, each one worse than the last. Elena gripped the edge of her chair. "Concentrate fire on the lead cruiser, Mark 7. Give our people a path to run." The Resolute's guns roared, and for a moment, one Krythar ship staggered under the assault, its shields flickering. But for every ship that fell back, 5 more closed the gap. The Krythar fought like a single mind, each vessel moving with perfect coordination, as if guided by one will. Human ships, by comparison, fought as individuals trying to survive, and in the chaos, formations broke apart. "Admiral, we're losing the Yamato, the Britannia, the—" Ray stopped, his voice failing him. Elena watched the tactical display, where the golden dots representing her ships blinked out, one after another, like candles in a storm. 200 ships, 150, 100. The numbers fell so fast that the display could barely keep up. "Admiral, we need to run," said Lieutenant Sarah Cade, a young officer who had been silent until now, standing near the navigation station. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. If we stay, everyone dies. If we run, some of us live to fight another day. Elena looked at the young lieutenant, barely 25 years old, already carrying the weight of a battle no one could win. She thought of every soldier under her command, every family waiting back on Earth, and she made her decision. All remaining ships, full retreat, head for the jump point. Resolute will cover the withdrawal. Admiral, that means, Ray started. I know what it means, Commander. Give the order. The remaining ships, fewer than 60 now, turned and ran, their engines burning at maximum power as they raced for the safety of a jump point that would take them back toward human space. The Resolute stayed behind, its weapons blazing, drawing the fire of a dozen Krythar cruisers so that others could escape. Elena stood on the bridge as the ship shook around her, sparks falling from damaged panels, alarms screaming in every direction. She thought, strangely, of her daughter back on Earth, only 8 years old, who did not yet understand what her mother did for a living. Admiral, shields are failing, Ray said quietly. We can't hold much longer. Then we hold as long as we can, Elena said. Order Cade to the escape pods. She's young. She should live. Sarah Cade opened her mouth to protest, but one look from Elena silenced her. Go, Lieutenant. Someone has to tell Earth what happened here. Someone has to remember. Sarah hesitated only a moment before running toward the escape pod bay, her heart pounding, her mind screaming at her to stay and fight. But she understood the order for what it was. Not weakness, but purpose. The Resolute's shields collapsed under the weight of enemy fire. Elena Voss stood at her post as the ship began to break apart around her, calm even in the final moment, giving orders to a crew that no longer had a ship to command. In the last second before the flagship's core exploded into a blinding light, she thought only of home, and of hope that this sacrifice would mean something. Far away, Sarah Cade's escape pod tumbled through space, thrown clear of the battle by the force of the explosion. Through the small window, she watched the wreckage of the human fleet drifting silently among the stars, pieces of ships that had once carried thousands of people, now nothing but debris. The Krythar fleet did not chase the survivors. They did not need to. They had already won, and to the Dominion, mercy toward a defeated enemy was simply a waste of resources. It took Sarah 11 days to be found by a passing supply ship, one of the few vessels that had escaped the massacre. When she finally returned to Earth, she carried with her the news that no one wanted to hear. The fleet was gone. 300 ships, tens of thousands of soldiers, the flower of humanity's military strength, wiped out in a single battle that had lasted less than 20 minutes. The news spread across Earth like a wave of ice water. Governments that had once argued over budgets and borders fell suddenly silent, watching the same broadcasts, hearing the same numbers. 90% of the fleet destroyed. The Dominion's armada, undamaged and now moving toward human space, was estimated to reach Earth's solar system within 4 months. In a small underground research facility outside what had once been Geneva, a scientist named Dr. Marcus Chen sat alone at his desk, staring at a message he had just received. It contained only one line: "The fleet is gone. Prepare for the worst." Marcus was not a soldier. He was an engineer, a quiet man who had spent the last 6 years working on a project that most people in the government considered a waste of time and money, a defense system built not around bigger guns or stronger shields, but around something else entirely, something the Krythar, in all their arrogance, had never bothered to consider as a threat. He looked at the message for a long time before closing his laptop and standing up. Around him, in a lab filled with humming machines and half-finished prototypes, a small team of scientists and engineers had gathered, their faces pale with the news. "They're coming," said one of the younger researchers, a woman named Priya, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we have 4 months to finish what we started." Across the planet, humanity began to prepare, not with the confidence of a species that expected to win, but with the quiet determination of a species that refused to simply lie down and die. Factories that had once built cars and airplanes began retooling for war. Civilian ships were requisitioned and armed. Every nation on Earth, for the first time in history, agreed to work as one, because there was no longer any question of which side anyone was on. There was only Earth, and there was the enemy. In the ruins of the Vareth system, the Krythar Grand Fleet regrouped under the command of High Overlord Threx Vaughn, a towering figure among his own kind, known across the Dominion for his brutal efficiency and conquest. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, Threx watched the reports of the battle scroll across his screen with something close to satisfaction. "The human fleet has been eliminated," said his second-in-command, a Krythar officer named Kesk. "Their homeworld stands undefended." Threx's 4 eyes narrowed slightly, an expression that among his species passed for something like a smile. "Good. Send word to the Dominion Council. Earth will fall within the season. Prepare the invasion fleet." Kesk hesitated, an unusual thing for a Krythar officer to do. "High Overlord, our scouts report that the humans are already rebuilding. Their industry moves faster than any species we have encountered." Threx made a low sound in his throat, something between a laugh and a growl. "Let them build. Let them believe they have hope. It changes nothing. We have crushed 1,000 worlds greater than this one. Humanity is nothing but an insect that has not yet learned it is already dead." He turned back to the view screen, where the wreckage of Earth's fleet still drifted silently in the black void of space, and he allowed himself a moment of pride. The Dominion had won. It was only a matter of time before the insects understood that as well. But 4 months was a long time, and humanity, though wounded and afraid, had not yet begun to fight. Back on Earth, in a quiet lab, far from the panic spreading through the cities above, Marcus Chen powered up an old, battered prototype that had sat unused for years, gathering dust in a corner. He looked at his small team, their faces tired but determined, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself a small, careful hope. "We're not ready," he said quietly, "but we have 4 months. Let's get ready." Outside, the sun was setting over a planet that did not yet know if it would see another year. But somewhere in that darkness, in labs and shipyards and quiet rooms full of frightened, determined people, the first threads of humanity's answer were beginning to take shape. The Krythar Dominion had destroyed Earth's fleet. They believed the war was already over. They were wrong. 3 weeks after the destruction of Earth's fleet, the planet had changed. Cities that once glowed bright with lights now dimmed their skylines to save power for the factories working around the clock. Schools closed early so children could help pack supplies. Parks turned into training grounds where ordinary people learned to load rifles and operate emergency drones. Fear had not disappeared, but it had been pushed aside by something stronger: purpose. At the underground facility outside Geneva, Dr. Marcus Chen had not slept properly in days. His eyes were red, his clothes wrinkled, but his hands were steady as he worked on the machine that had consumed his life for the past 6 years. The device sat in the center of the lab, a strange construction of coils and crystal cores, about the size of a small car. To anyone who did not understand it, it looked like nothing more than expensive junk, but Marcus knew what it could do, if he could only finish it in time. "Talk to me, Priya," Marcus said, not looking up from his work. "Where are we on the core stability?" Priya Nair, a brilliant young physicist who had joined the project 2 years earlier, checked her readings and frowned. "Still fluctuating. We're at 60% efficiency. If we push it past that without fixing the resonance issue, the core could overload." "How long to fix it?" "With the equipment we have, maybe 6 weeks, maybe longer." Marcus rubbed his eyes. 6 weeks. The Krythar fleet was 3.5 months away, and shrinking. Every day mattered now. The project, known only by the codename Silence, had begun years earlier as a theoretical idea. Marcus and his team had studied recordings of Krythar ships during smaller skirmishes over the years, moments when Earth's outer colonies had faced Dominion raiding parties, and, against all odds, survived. In every one of those recordings, Marcus had noticed something strange. The Krythar ships relied heavily on a network, a shared communication and targeting system that linked every vessel in their fleet together, allowing them to move and fight as if they were a single mind. It was the source of their terrifying coordination in battle. It was also, Marcus believed, a weakness no one else had thought to exploit. If that network could be disrupted, even for a few critical seconds, the Krythar fleet would stop moving like one perfect machine. It would become 1,000 separate ships, each captain forced to think and react alone, for the first time in their military careers. And Krythar captains, Marcus had learned from years of study, were not trained to think alone. They were trained to obey. Silence was not a weapon in the way most people imagined weapons. It would not blow up ships or tear through hulls. It was, in simple terms, a device built to interrupt that shared network across a wide area of space, using a kind of energy pulse tuned to the exact frequency the Krythar used to communicate between ships. If it worked, it would make the mighty Dominion fleet blind and deaf to itself, if only for a short time. But a short time, in the middle of a space battle, could mean everything. The problem was that no one had ever built anything like it before, and no one knew for certain if it would work at all. Meanwhile, above ground, humanity's other preparations moved forward with astonishing speed. Shipyards that had built commercial freighters for decades now built armored hulls for military use. Weapons that had once existed only in prototype labs were rushed into mass production. Every nation contributed something. Engineers from Japan improved the targeting systems. Factories in India built engine components at record speed. Workers in Brazil and Nigeria and Germany all found ways to help, driven by the same fear and the same hope. Sarah Cade, the young lieutenant who had survived the destruction of the Resolute, had been promoted to commander and placed in charge of training the crews for Earth's new fleet, a mismatched collection of retrofitted freighters, converted cargo haulers, and a handful of newly built warships that would not be ready for months. She stood in a training hall filled with young men and women, many of them barely out of school, who had volunteered to fight a war they knew almost nothing about. "Listen carefully," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the room. "I'm not going to lie to you. What happened to the Resolute? What happened to our fleet at Vareth? That was real. I was there. I watched good people die, because the enemy was faster, stronger, and better coordinated than we were." The room was silent. No one moved. "But I also watched them run, when we hit them hard enough," Sarah continued. "For one moment, before our fleet broke, we damaged one of their cruisers badly enough that it had to fall back. That means they can be hurt. That means they are not gods. They are an enemy, and enemies can be beaten, if we're smart enough and brave enough to find a way." A young recruit near the front raised his hand. "Commander, is it true the fleet is going to fight them again? With what exactly? We don't have anything close to what they had at Vareth." Sarah hesitated only briefly. She had heard whispers about a secret project, something being developed far below the surface, something that might change everything. She did not know the details, and she had been ordered not to speak of it even if she did. "We're not fighting the same battle twice," she said carefully. "We're going to fight smarter. That's all I can tell you for now. Trust me, and trust each other." Far above Earth, in the cold vacuum of space, the first Krythar scout ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. Small vessels sent ahead of the main invasion fleet to test Earth's defenses and gather information. Command of Earth's remaining orbital defense fell to a joint task force led by Sarah herself, still recovering from the trauma of Vareth, but unwilling to step aside while there was still a war to fight. 3 scout ships detected entering the outer system, reported Ensign Tomas Rivera from his station aboard the defense platform Kestrel, a converted space station retrofitted with weapons batteries. "They're moving toward the asteroid belt, likely scouting our mining operations." Sarah studied the display. The Krythar scouts were fast, agile ships, designed for reconnaissance rather than combat, each one carrying a small crew and advanced sensors. If they returned to the Dominion fleet with detailed information about Earth's defenses, the coming invasion would be even deadlier than expected. "We can't let them report back," Sarah said. "Assemble a strike team. Small, fast ships only. We hit them before they can transmit anything." It was a risk. Earth's remaining ships were precious, each one representing months of desperate work, and losing even a few in a skirmish with scouts could weaken the fleet before the real battle even began. But allowing the Krythar to learn everything about Earth's defenses was a risk Sarah was not willing to take. 4 modified fighters, fast and difficult to detect, launched from the Kestrel and raced toward the asteroid belt, where the scout ships had been spotted. Sarah rode in the lead fighter herself, unwilling to send others into danger she was not willing to face. "Contact in 30 seconds, said her pilot, a steady young woman named Officer Diane Osei. The Krythar scouts, confident in their technological superiority and unaware they were being hunted, moved lazily through the asteroid field, their sensors sweeping the mining stations below. They did not expect resistance. Earth's fleet had been destroyed. To the Dominion, humanity was already a defeated species, incapable of mounting any real defense. That confidence would prove to be their mistake. Sarah's fighters used the asteroid field itself as cover, weaving between massive rocks to avoid detection, until they were close enough to strike. "Weapons hot," Sarah ordered quietly. "Target their communication arrays first. We want them silent before they know we're here." The 4 human fighters struck in perfect coordination, a tactic Sarah herself had designed after studying the failure at Vareth. Rather than relying on brute strength, they targeted precisely, disabling the Krythar ship's ability to transmit, before turning their weapons on the engines and weapons systems. The scout ships, caught completely by surprise, never had a chance to fight back properly. Within minutes, all 3 Krythar vessels were disabled, drifting helplessly among the asteroids, their crews captured alive. It was a small victory, barely a footnote compared to the massive battle at Vareth, but it was the first real victory humanity had achieved against the Dominion in this war, and news of it spread quickly across Earth. For the first time since the destruction of the fleet, people allowed themselves to feel something other than fear. Hope, however small, began to take root. Aboard the Eternal Judgment, High Overlord Threx Vaughn received the news of the lost scout ships with cold fury. "Explain to me," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "how 3 of my ships were destroyed by a species with no fleet remaining." Kesk, his second in command, stood stiffly at attention. "High Overlord, our scouts underestimated the humans' remaining defenses. Their tactics were unusual. They did not fight as we expected." "Unusual," Threx repeated, tasting the word with disdain. "Send a larger force, 10 warships. Crush whatever defenses remain in their outer system before the main fleet arrives. I will not allow this insect species to delay us further." Kesk bowed and turned to relay the order, but a small, uncertain thought lingered in his mind, one he did not dare speak aloud. The humans had been defeated at Vareth, utterly and completely, and yet here they were, weeks later, fighting back with tactics the Dominion had never encountered before. It was a small thing, a minor skirmish in the grand scale of the war, but something about it troubled him. Back on Earth, deep in the underground lab, Marcus Chen received word of Sarah's victory with quiet satisfaction, though his mind remained fixed on his own work. The captured Krythar prisoners were being transported to secure facilities, and among them was something Marcus had been hoping for: intact Krythar communication equipment, technology his team could study up close for the first time. "Marcus," Priya called out, rushing into the lab with a data tablet in her hands. "You need to see this. They've recovered a working communication core from one of the captured scout ships." Marcus's tired eyes lit up with something close to excitement. "Get it here immediately. If we can study their actual network hardware, we might be able to fix the resonance problem in the silence core." For the first time in weeks, hope stirred in the underground lab, the same quiet hope spreading through the training halls, the shipyards, and the streets above. Earth's fleet had been destroyed, and the enemy fleet was still coming, larger and more terrible than anything humanity had ever faced. But in small victories in stolen technology, in late nights and desperate work, humanity was beginning to find its answer. The Krythar Dominion had 10 warships on their way to crush what remained of Earth's outer defenses. Whether Earth would be ready for them remained an open question. But for the first time since the fleet fell at Vareth, humanity believed it had a chance. 2 months remained before the Krythar invasion fleet would reach Earth, and the 10 Dominion warships sent to punish humanity for its small victory were already halfway across the outer system. Sarah Cade stood on the command deck of the Kestrel, watching the tactical display as the enemy ships drew closer, their formation tight and disciplined, exactly as she expected. "They're coming in fast," said Ensign Rivera. "ETA to the mining stations, 6 hours." Sarah studied the map of the outer system, her mind working through every possible strategy. 10 Krythar warships, each far more powerful than anything in Earth's small defense fleet, were heading for the asteroid belt mining operations, the same place where her fighters had ambushed the scout ships weeks earlier. This time, the enemy would not be caught off guard. They were coming prepared for a fight, and Earth's defenses, still rebuilding, were not ready to meet them in open battle. "We can't fight them ship to ship," Sarah said quietly. Not yet. We need another way. It was Marcus Chen who provided the answer, though not the one anyone expected. 2 weeks earlier, using data recovered from the captured Krythar communication core, his team had made a breakthrough on the Silence project. The resonance problem that had plagued the device for months was finally solved, and the machine, still only a rough prototype, was ready for its first real test. But it was small, built for a single ship, not an entire fleet, and it had never been tested in actual combat. It's not ready for a full deployment, Marcus explained during an emergency video call with Sarah and the other military leaders. But I can install a working unit on one ship. If it functions the way we believe it will, it should disrupt the Krythar communication network within a certain radius. Their ships would lose the ability to coordinate with each other, even for a short time. How short? Sarah asked. We don't know for certain. Our best estimate is somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. General Okoye, the head of Earth's Combined Military Command, frowned deeply on the screen. That's an enormous risk to take on an unproven weapon, Doctor. If it fails, we lose ships we cannot afford to lose. If we don't try something new, General, we lose them anyway, Marcus replied. The Krythar outpower us in every conventional way. Our only chance is to change the rules of the fight. After a long silence, General Okoye nodded slowly. Commander Cade, it's your call. You'll be leading the defense. Sarah looked at the tactical display again, at the 10 enemy warships moving steadily closer, and made her decision. Install the device on the Kestrel. I'll lead the engagement myself. Marcus and his team worked around the clock for the next 4 days, installing the experimental Silence device into the heart of the Kestrel's systems, running tests, checking and rechecking every connection. Priya barely left the ship's engineering bay, surviving on coffee and nervous energy as she monitored the core's stability. If this thing overloads in combat, she told Marcus quietly, during a rare quiet moment, it could take out our own ship along with theirs. I know, Marcus said. But if it works, it could save the whole fleet, maybe the whole planet. Sometimes the only way forward is through the risk. On the day the Krythar warships finally reached the outer system, Earth's defense fleet, now grown to nearly 40 ships thanks to months of desperate shipbuilding, moved into position near the mining stations. It was a strange fleet, a patchwork of converted freighters, armed cargo ships, and a small number of purpose-built warships, nothing like the mighty force that had been destroyed at Vareth. But it was what Earth had, and it would have to be enough. Sarah stood on the Kestrel's bridge, her hands steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. She had faced the Krythar once before, at Vareth, and she had watched hundreds of ships and thousands of people die in less than 20 minutes. She would not let that happen again if she could help it. Enemy fleet entering weapons range, Rivera reported. They're forming attack formation. Hold position, Sarah ordered. Let them come to us. We need them close enough for the device to reach their whole formation. The Krythar commander leading the attack, a battle-hardened officer named Vorek, watched the small human fleet with something close to contempt. 10 warships against 40 makeshift vessels should have been an easy, one-sided slaughter. He gave the order to advance, confident that within minutes, the pathetic human resistance would be crushed, just as thoroughly as their main fleet had been at Vareth. They're closing fast, Rivera said, tension creeping into his voice. Weapons range in 90 seconds. Sarah waited, watching the enemy formation grow larger on the display, counting down the seconds in her head. She needed them close, tightly grouped, within the effective range of the Silence device. 60 seconds, Rivera said. Steady, Sarah said, though her heart pounded against her ribs. 30 seconds, Admiral. They're entering firing range. They'll open fire any moment now. Marcus, Sarah said into her comm, her voice tight. Activate the device. Now. In the engineering bay, Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he entered the activation sequence, a code he had written and rewritten 100 times over the past 6 years, never certain until this exact moment whether it would truly work. Activating Silence, he said, and pressed the final key. A wave of invisible energy rippled outward from the Kestrel, spreading across space toward the approaching Krythar fleet. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Krythar ships continued their advance, weapons charging, ready to fire. Then, all at once, chaos erupted across the enemy formation. Aboard the lead Krythar cruiser, Commander Vorik watched in confusion as his tactical display, once showing a perfectly synchronized fleet moving as one, suddenly fractured into 10 separate, disconnected signals. The shared network that linked every Krythar ship together, the system that allowed them to move and fight with perfect unity, had gone completely silent. "Report," Vorik demanded. "What is happening to the network?" "Unknown, Commander," his officer replied, panic creeping into his usually disciplined voice. "All fleet communications are down. We cannot coordinate with the other vessels." For the first time in his long military career, Vorik found himself forced to make decisions alone, without the guidance of the shared tactical network his species had relied upon for centuries. It was a terrifying, disorienting feeling, like a man who had always walked with a guiding hand, suddenly finding himself blind in the dark. "Sir, the human fleet is opening fire," his officer shouted. Sarah did not hesitate. "All ships, attack. Concentrate fire on the lead cruiser, Mark 1. Hit them now, while they're confused." Earth's patchwork fleet, trained for months under Sarah's careful guidance, surged forward, striking with a coordination the Krythar had not expected from a species they considered primitive. Without their shared network, the 10 Krythar warships found themselves fighting as individuals for the first time in living memory, each captain forced to rely on his own judgment, his own instincts, skills that had atrophied after generations of relying on the collective mind of the Dominion fleet. The battle that followed was nothing like the massacre at Vareth. Human ships, moving with practiced precision, targeted the confused Krythar vessels one at a time, striking weak points, disabling engines and weapons before the enemy could organize any real defense. The disruption lasted only 90 seconds, just as Marcus had predicted, but 90 seconds was enough. By the time the Krythar network flickered back to life, 3 of their 10 warships were already disabled, drifting and burning in the void, and the remaining 7 found themselves badly outmaneuvered by a human fleet that had used the chaos to seize the advantage. "Commander, the enemy is reforming," Rivera warned. "Their network is back online." Sarah's mind raced. Once the Krythar regained their coordination, the tide of battle could turn quickly against Earth's smaller fleet. "All ships, focus fire on the damaged cruisers. Finish them before the others can regroup. Everyone else, fall back to defensive formation." The remaining Krythar ships, now coordinated once more, began to fight back with terrifying efficiency, and Earth's fleet suffered losses of its own. The freighter Hopewell, converted hastily for war, took a direct hit and broke apart. The cruiser Meridian lost half its crew to a devastating strike along its hull. But the damage done during those crucial 90 seconds of chaos had shifted the balance of the battle in ways the Krythar had never experienced before. After nearly 2 hours of brutal fighting, Commander Vorik, watching 6 of his 10 ships destroyed or disabled, made the decision no Krythar officer wanted to make. "Order the retreat," he said quietly, humiliation heavy in his voice. "We return to report to the High Overlord." The remaining 4 Krythar warships withdrew from the system, leaving behind the wreckage of 6 vessels, and a battle that should have been an easy victory for the Dominion. Earth's fleet, though battered and having lost 3 ships of its own, had done something no other species in Krythar memory had managed to do. They had fought the Dominion to a standstill and forced them to retreat. Aboard the Kestrel, Sarah allowed herself a long, shaking breath as the enemy ships vanished from the tactical display. "Marcus," she said into her comm, her voice thick with emotion. "It worked. It actually worked." In the engineering bay, Marcus Chen sat down heavily, his hands still trembling from the tension of the last 2 hours, tears of relief and exhaustion in his eyes. 6 years of work, of doubt, of quiet late nights when he wondered if any of it mattered, had led to this single moment. "We bought ourselves time," he said quietly to Priya, who stood beside him, equally exhausted. "But the silence device only worked on 10 ships. The invasion fleet has hundreds. We need to scale this up, and fast." News of the victory spread across Earth within hours, and for the first time since the destruction of the fleet at Vareth, the planet allowed itself to celebrate. It was not a final victory. Everyone understood that the true test, the arrival of the Dominion's full invasion fleet, was still 2 months away. But it was proof, undeniable proof, that the Krythar Dominion could be beaten. Aboard the Eternal Judgment, High Overlord Threx Vaughn listened to Vorek's report with barely controlled fury, his 4 eyes blazing with anger as he processed the loss of 6 warships to a fleet of converted freighters. They used some manner of weapon against our network, Vorek explained carefully, choosing each word with caution. Our ships lost coordination for approximately 90 seconds. It was enough for them to gain an advantage. Threx was silent for a long moment, his mind working through the implications of what he had just heard. In 3,000 years of Dominion conquest, no species had ever managed to disrupt the sacred network that bound Krythar fleets together. It was considered impossible, a fundamental law of their military doctrine. Increase the invasion fleet, Threx finally said, his voice cold and hard. Double it. I will not underestimate this species again. Whatever weapon they used, we will be ready for it when the main fleet arrives. Earth will fall, and this time, there will be no mistakes. Kesk bowed and moved to relay the order, but as he did, he could not shake the small, uncomfortable thought that had been growing in his mind since the destruction of the scout ships weeks earlier. The humans were not the primitive, defeated species the Dominion had assumed them to be. They were adapting, learning, finding new ways to fight, faster than any species the Krythar had ever conquered. Back on Earth, in the underground lab that had become the heart of humanity's desperate resistance, Marcus Chen and his team began the difficult work of scaling the silence device for full fleet deployment, knowing they had perhaps 2 months to accomplish what had taken 6 years to build the first time. Earth's small victory had bought time, but it had also ensured that the coming battle would be larger and more terrible than anything humanity had yet faced. Sarah Cade, promoted once more for her leadership during the battle, stood before her assembled crews that evening, her voice carrying across the training hall with new confidence. "We proved something today," she said. "We proved they can be beaten. Now we have 2 months to get ready for the fight that decides everything." Outside, across the planet, humanity worked through the night, driven not by fear alone, but by something new. The belief, however fragile, that they might actually survive what was coming. The next 2 months passed in a blur of exhausting, relentless work. Across Earth, factories that had once made cars, phones, and household goods now produced weapons, armor plating, and components for warships around the clock. Marcus Chen's small underground team had grown into a project involving thousands of engineers and scientists from every corner of the planet, all working to scale the silence device from a single prototype into a weapon capable of disrupting an entire invasion fleet. It was not easy. The device that had worked on the Kestrel had been built for a single ship, a single burst of disruption lasting less than 2 minutes. What Marcus now needed to build was something far larger. A network of devices spread across multiple ships, capable of blanketing an area of space large enough to cover hundreds of enemy vessels, and powerful enough to hold that disruption long enough to matter in a battle that could decide the fate of the planet. "We have 30 working units," Priya reported during one of the daily briefings, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Each one needs to be installed on a different ship, spread through the fleet in a pattern that maximizes coverage. But there's a problem." "There's always a problem," Marcus said tiredly, rubbing his eyes. "The units drain enormous power when activated. If we run them all at once, at full strength, we risk overloading every ship carrying one. We could lose 30 ships in the same moment we activate the weapon." Marcus stared at the schematics on the table in front of him, his mind working through the numbers. 30 ships, each one a hard-won piece of Earth's rebuilt fleet, each one carrying a crew who had trained for months to fight this war. Losing them all at once, in the very moment they were meant to save everyone else, would be a devastating blow. "We stagger the activation," Marcus said slowly, an idea forming. "Instead of firing all 30 units simultaneously, we activate them in a rolling wave, timed so that as one unit's field begins to weaken, the next one takes over. It spreads the power drain across time, instead of concentrating it all at once." Priya considered this, running the numbers quickly in her head. It could work, but the timing would have to be perfect. If even one unit fires out of sequence, it could create gaps in the disruption field, gaps the Krythar network might slip through. "Then we make sure the timing is perfect," Marcus said. While Marcus and his team worked on refining the weapon, Sarah Cade faced her own enormous challenge, turning Earth's patchwork fleet, now grown to nearly 120 ships, into a force capable of executing a complex, coordinated battle plan against an enemy that outnumbered them many times over. The Krythar invasion fleet, according to the latest intelligence gathered from captured prisoners and long-range sensors, now numbered close to 800 warships, doubled in size exactly as High Overlord Threx had promised. 800 ships against 120, General Okoye said grimly, during a strategy session held in Earth's Central Command bunker. Even with the silence device, those are not good odds, Commander. They're not meant to be a fair fight, Sarah replied, standing before a holographic display of the battle plan she and her staff had spent weeks developing. We're not trying to defeat them in open combat. We're trying to survive long enough, and hurt them badly enough, that they decide continuing this invasion costs more than it's worth. The plan Sarah had developed was built around 3 key phases. First, Earth's fleet would draw the Krythar invasion force into a specific region of space, near the edge of the solar system, close enough to Earth's remaining defense platforms that human ships could retreat to cover if needed, but far enough that any battle would not immediately threaten the planet itself. Second, once the Krythar fleet was fully committed to the engagement, the silence devices would activate in their staggered pattern, disrupting the enemy's coordination in waves, rather than all at once, buying Earth's ships crucial minutes of advantage throughout the battle, rather than just at its start. Third, and most critically, a specially prepared strike force would use the resulting chaos to target something Marcus's intelligence team had identified through months of studying captured Krythar technology and interrogating prisoners: the flagship's Central Command Core, the physical heart of the network that bound the entire Dominion fleet together. If we can disable or destroy the Eternal Judgment's command core specifically, Marcus explained during the briefing, it won't just create a temporary disruption like the silence device does. It could permanently cripple the fleet's ability to coordinate, at least for the rest of this engagement. Their entire military doctrine depends on that shared network. Take away the head, and the body doesn't know how to move. That's assuming we can even get close enough to their flagship to strike it, General Okoye pointed out. The Eternal Judgment will be surrounded by their most powerful escort ships. It's the most heavily defended vessel in their entire fleet. Sarah nodded, having already considered this problem extensively. That's why the strike force needs to be small, fast, and expendable. We're not sending our best warships. We're sending a handful of stealth-modified fighters, designed to slip through the chaos created by the silence device, while the larger fleet keeps the Krythar escorts occupied. It was a dangerous plan, one that Sarah herself intended to lead personally, despite the strong objections of General Okoye and much of her own staff. "Commander, you're too valuable to risk on a strike mission," Okoye argued. "Let someone else lead the flagship assault." "With respect, General, I know this plan better than anyone else alive," Sarah replied firmly. "I designed it. I should be the one to see it through." In the final weeks before the Krythar invasion fleet was expected to arrive, Earth prepared with a focus and unity the planet had never before achieved. Old rivalries between nations faded into irrelevance. Resources flowed freely between countries that had once guarded their technology jealously. Every ship, every weapon, every trained soldier became part of a single, unified defense, because for the first time in human history, the entire species faced a threat that made all previous conflicts seem meaningless by comparison. Marcus worked until he collapsed from exhaustion more than once, refusing to rest until every one of the 30 silence units had been tested, calibrated, and installed correctly across the fleet. Priya, equally exhausted but equally determined, oversaw the training of the ship crews who would need to activate the devices with split-second precision during the coming battle. Sarah trained her strike team relentlessly, 6 pilots chosen for their skill and their willingness to fly directly into the most dangerous part of the coming battle. Among them was Officer Diane Osei, who had flown beside Sarah during the ambush of the Krythar scout ships months earlier, and who had volunteered immediately when Sarah explained the mission. "You understand this might be a one-way trip," Sarah told her strike team during their final briefing, standing before 6 young pilots whose faces showed fear, but also unshakable resolve. "If we're caught by their escort ships before we reach the flagship, there's a good chance none of us come back." "With respect, Commander," Diane said quietly, "if we don't try, there might not be an Earth left to come back to." Sarah looked at each of her pilots in turn, feeling the weight of what she was asking of them, and found in their eyes the same quiet determination she had seen across the entire planet these past 6 months. Fear, Yes, but also something stronger. 3 days before the Krythar invasion fleet was expected to arrive, Earth's long-range sensors picked up the first signs of their approach. A massive gravitational disturbance at the edge of the solar system, the telltale sign of hundreds of ships preparing to translate into the system all at once. High Overlord Threx Vaughn had assembled a fleet larger than any the Dominion had sent against a single world in over a century, determined to crush the insects that had dared to embarrass him twice already. Aboard the Eternal Judgment, Threx stood on his command deck, watching as the invasion fleet gathered around his flagship in perfect, disciplined formation. 800 warships, more than enough power to erase Earth from existence 100 times over. He had studied the reports of the humans' mysterious disruption weapon carefully, and his engineers had developed countermeasures, redundant communication systems, designed to resist whatever technology the humans had used against Commander Vorek's fleet. This time, Threx said to Kesk, standing beside him, there will be no surprises. The humans have proven more resourceful than expected, but resourcefulness cannot overcome the sheer weight of our numbers. We will crush their fleet, take their world, and add this troublesome species to the long list of those who learned too late that resistance to the Dominion is meaningless. Kesk bowed in agreement, though privately, he found himself remembering the reports from Vorek's defeat, the strange, unsettling determination the humans had shown even when facing certain destruction. It was a quality he had never encountered in any other conquered species, and it troubled him more than he cared to admit. On Earth, in the final hours before the battle, Sarah Cade stood alone on the observation deck of the Kestrel, looking out at the stars, at the darkness, where an enemy fleet larger than anything humanity had ever faced was gathering to end the war in a single, overwhelming strike. She thought of Elena Voss, the admiral who had sacrificed herself at Vareth so others could escape. She thought of every soldier who had died in the months since, every family who had lost someone to this war, that humanity had never asked for but could not avoid. Marcus found her there, his own face showing the exhaustion of 6 months of relentless work compressed into a single, desperate effort. The silence array is ready, he said quietly, standing beside her. 30 units, staggered activation sequence, tested 100 times over. It's the best we can do. It has to be enough, Sarah said. It will be, Marcus replied, though his voice carried the same uncertainty that gripped every person on Earth in these final hours. We've done everything we can. Now it comes down to the people flying those ships tomorrow. Sarah nodded slowly, watching the stars, knowing that somewhere beyond them, 800 Krythar warships were preparing to descend upon her home world, confident in their overwhelming power, certain of an easy victory. She thought of the plan she had built, the strike team she would lead personally into the heart of the enemy fleet, and the terrible risk that everything depended on a handful of fighters reaching a single, heavily defended target in the chaos of the largest battle humanity had ever fought. Get some rest if you can, Marcus said gently. Tomorrow, we find out if 6 years of work was worth it. Tomorrow, Sarah agreed quietly, we find out if humanity survives. Below them, across the darkened planet, billions of people prepared for a battle they could not fight themselves, watching the skies with a mixture of terror and desperate hope, waiting to learn whether the small fleet their species had built in 6 impossible months would be enough to stand against an empire that had never known defeat. The Krythar Dominion's full invasion fleet was 3 days from Earth. Humanity's answer, 6 years and 6 desperate months in the making, waited for them in the dark. The Krythar invasion fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system, exactly as predicted, 800 warships translating into human space, in a wave that stretched across the dark like a storm front rolling in over the horizon. High Overlord Threx Vaughn stood upon the command deck of the Eternal Judgment, watching the tactical display fill with the golden markers of his own fleet, a force so vast that no world had ever survived its arrival. Move the fleet toward the human homeworld, Threx ordered. Engage any resistance and destroy it completely. This ends today. Earth's fleet, 120 ships strong, waited for them at the edge of the asteroid field, near the outer planets, exactly where Sarah Cade's battle plan called for the engagement to begin. Standing on the bridge of the Kestrel, Sarah watched the enemy fleet approach on the display, an overwhelming wall of enemy vessels that dwarfed anything humanity had built in response. They're entering the engagement zone, Rivera reported, his voice tight with tension. All Krythar ships, full formation, weapons charged. "Hold the line," Sarah ordered, her voice carrying across the fleet's communication network to every ship under her command. "Remember the plan. We draw them in, we let the silence array do its work, and we hit their flagship while they're blind. Everyone trust the plan and trust each other." Across 120 ships, crews who had trained for 6 desperate months held their positions, watching 800 enemy warships close the distance. Weapons ready, hearts pounding, minds fixed on the plan they had rehearsed 1,000 times. The Krythar fleet opened fire first, a wall of green energy beams tearing across the void toward the human formation. Earth's ships scattered into the evasive patterns Sarah had drilled into every pilot, weaving between incoming fire, returning shots of their own that struck at the leading edge of the massive enemy fleet. "First wave of silence units, activate," Sarah ordered. Aboard 10 scattered ships throughout the human fleet, crews initiated the first stage of Marcus's staggered disruption sequence. Waves of invisible energy rippled outward, striking the leading elements of the Krythar formation. Aboard dozens of Dominion warships, tactical displays flickered and died as the shared network that bound them together fell silent, forcing captains who had never fought without its guidance to make decisions alone for the first time in their careers. "Enemy formation showing confusion in the forward elements," Rivera reported, excitement breaking through his professional tone. "It's working, Commander." But 800 ships were not 10, and the disruption, while effective on the leading edge of the Krythar fleet, could not cover the entire massive formation at once. Ships further back, still connected to the network, continued their coordinated advance, and the sheer size of the Dominion fleet began to tell against Earth's smaller force. "Second wave, activate," Sarah called, watching as the first wave's effect began to weaken. The staggered sequence continued exactly as Marcus had designed it, each new wave of silence units picking up as the previous one faded, spreading confusion through different sections of the enemy fleet, in a rolling pattern that kept significant portions of the Dominion force fighting blind and disconnected throughout the opening phase of the battle. It was not enough to stop the invasion entirely, but it created exactly what Sarah needed: chaos, confusion, and gaps in the enemy's otherwise impenetrable formation. "Strike team, this is Cade," Sarah said into her comm, her voice steady despite the battle raging around her ship. "The path is opening. Move in now, while their forward defenses are still recovering." 6 stealth-modified fighters, led by Sarah herself, broke away from the main battle and streaked toward the heart of the Krythar formation, using the chaos of the disrupted network to slip between confused enemy ships that would normally have detected and destroyed them instantly. "Diane, stay tight on my wing," Sarah said, weaving her fighter between 2 massive Krythar cruisers that had temporarily lost contact with the rest of their fleet, their weapons silent as their crews struggled to re-establish coordination. "Copy that, Commander. We're clear so far, but this won't last." Aboard the Eternal Judgment, High Overlord Threx watched with growing fury as reports of confusion and disconnection spread through his fleet. "Explain this immediately," he demanded. "High Overlord, the humans are using some manner of disruption technology, similar to what was reported after the incident with Commander Vorek's fleet, but far more extensive," Kesk reported, struggling to make sense of the rapidly shifting battle. "It appears to be moving through our formation in waves, rather than striking all at once. Compensate. Use the backup coordination protocols. I want this fleet fighting as one again, immediately." But even as Kesk worked to restore order, the 6 human fighters continued their dangerous approach toward the flagship, using every gap created by the rolling disruption to slip closer, undetected, through a formation that should have made such an approach impossible. "Commander, we're picking up enemy fighters approaching the flagship's position," one of Threx's officers reported urgently. "Small craft, moving fast, possibly trying to reach the Eternal Judgment directly." Threx's 4 eyes widened with something between disbelief and fury. "Impossible. No enemy craft could penetrate our escort screen. They're using the network disruption to bypass our detection systems, High Overlord. Recommend immediate escort response." "Then respond," Threx roared. "Destroy them before they get any closer." Krythar escort ships, finally regaining enough coordination to detect the threat, began converging on Sarah's small strike team. Energy beams tore through space around the human fighters as they raced toward their target. "We've got company," Diane called out as two escort cruisers broke off from the main formation, weapons targeting the approaching fighters. "This is where it gets difficult, Commander. Stay on target," Sarah ordered, gripping her controls tightly as her fighter shook from a near miss. "We're almost there. Nothing matters except reaching that flagship." One of the 6 fighters, piloted by a young officer named Chen Wei, took a direct hit and vanished in a burst of light, gone in an instant. Sarah felt the loss like a physical blow, but there was no time to grieve. No time for anything, except the mission that now depended on the 5 remaining fighters reaching their target. "Keep moving," Sarah shouted over the comm. "We're almost in range." The Eternal Judgment loomed ahead, a mile-long vessel bristling with weapons and defenses, the physical heart of the entire Krythar invasion fleet. As Marcus's intelligence team had predicted, the command core, the source of the network that bound the fleet together, was located near the ship's central spine, protected by heavy armor, but accessible through a specific docking port used for emergency maintenance access. "There," Sarah said, spotting the access point exactly where Marcus's stolen intelligence had indicated it would be. "That's our target. All fighters, converge on that docking port." Krythar defensive fire intensified as the remaining human fighters closed the final distance, weapons and point defense systems aboard the flagship itself, now targeting the small, fast-moving craft. A second fighter took damage, its pilot fighting to maintain control as sparks flew from a damaged engine. "I'm hit, but I can still fly," the pilot called out. "Continuing approach." Sarah's fighter shuddered under a glancing blow, alarms blaring throughout her cockpit, but she pushed forward, focused entirely on the docking port now filling her forward view. "Prepare the charges," she ordered. "We only get one chance at this." The 5 remaining fighters reached the docking port together, and in a maneuver practiced 100 times in simulation, but never before attempted in actual combat, they launched a coordinated payload of specially designed explosive charges directly into the access point, charges built by Marcus's team, specifically to penetrate Krythar hull armor and reach the sensitive command systems believed to lie just beyond. "Charges away," Sarah called. "Everyone, pull back now, full reverse thrust." The fighters scattered away from the flagship as the charges detonated in a precisely timed sequence, tearing through the docking port and the armored corridors beyond, driving deep into the heart of the Eternal Judgment, toward the command core that bound the entire invasion fleet together. Aboard the flagship, alarms screamed through every corridor as the explosion tore through critical systems. Threx felt the ship shudder violently beneath him, watched in horror as displays throughout the bridge flickered and died. "Report," he bellowed. "What has happened?" "High Overlord, the command core has sustained critical damage," an officer shouted, panic clear in his voice. "We're losing connection to the fleet network. All ships, we're losing all ships." Across the entire Krythar formation, 800 warships suddenly found themselves completely cut off from the shared network that had guided their every coordinated movement for the entire battle. Unlike the temporary, rolling disruption of the silence array, this damage was direct and severe, striking at the very source of the network itself. Krythar captains, trained for their entire careers to fight as extensions of a single collective will, suddenly found themselves utterly alone, with no guidance, no coordination, and no experience making independent tactical decisions in the heat of battle. "All ships, this is Commander Cade," Sarah's voice rang out across Earth's fleet communication network. Exhaustion and triumph mixed together in her voice. "Their command core is down. Hit them now, while they're disorganized. This is our moment." Earth's fleet surged forward with renewed energy, striking at the confused and disconnected Krythar formation with a coordination and precision that starkly contrasted with the enemy's sudden disarray. Ships that had fought as a single, terrifying unit only minutes earlier now fought as isolated, uncertain individuals, each captain forced to guess at strategies that had always been provided for them. The battle that followed lasted nearly 6 hours, brutal and costly for both sides, but the fundamental balance had shifted irreversibly the moment the Eternal Judgment's command core went silent. Krythar ships, unable to coordinate effectively, fell one by one to Earth's smaller but far more unified fleet. By the time the sun began to rise over the battle-scarred edge of the solar system, nearly 300 Krythar warships had been destroyed or disabled, and the remainder of the once mighty invasion fleet had scattered into a disorganized retreat. Aboard the crippled Eternal Judgment, High Overlord Threx Vaughn stood amid the wreckage of his command deck, watching the tactical display show the impossible. An invasion fleet, larger and more powerful than any sent against a single world in a century, broken and retreating from a species he had dismissed as insects only months earlier. "Order the full withdrawal," Threx said quietly, defeat heavy in every word. "Recall all surviving vessels. We return to Dominion space." Kesk, standing nearby with his own wounds bandaged hastily, said nothing. But for the first time since the campaign against Earth had begun, he allowed himself to feel something other than confidence in the Dominion's inevitable victory. Whatever this species was, they had proven, beyond any doubt, that they were far more dangerous than any conquered world in Krythar memory. Sarah Cade, her fighter badly damaged but still flying, watched from a distance as the remaining Krythar ships turned and fled toward the edge of the system, the massive invasion fleet reduced to a shattered remnant of its former strength. Tears mixed with exhaustion on her face as she keyed her comm. "This is Commander Cade. To all Earth forces. The enemy fleet is retreating. Repeat, the enemy fleet is retreating. We held the line." Across Earth, in cities and towns and quiet homes, where billions of people had spent the night watching the skies in terrified silence, the news spread like a wave of light breaking across a long, dark night. Cheers erupted in streets that had been silent for months. Families embraced, strangers wept together, and for the first time since the destruction of the fleet at Vareth nearly a year earlier, humanity allowed itself to believe, truly believe, that it had survived. In the underground lab outside Geneva, Marcus Chen received the news of Sarah's victory with a quiet, overwhelming relief that left him unable to speak for several long moments. Priya, standing beside him, simply reached out and took his hand, both of them too exhausted and too moved to find words adequate to the moment. "We did it," Priya finally whispered. "Marcus, we actually did it." "We did," Marcus agreed softly, looking out through the lab's small window at the sky above, where somewhere far beyond sight, the wreckage of a broken invasion fleet drifted silently among the stars, and where the small, battered remains of Earth's own fleet were making their long journey home. The war was not truly over. The Krythar Dominion, wounded and humiliated, would not forget this defeat, and it would be many years before Earth could be certain the Dominion would not return with an even greater force, seeking revenge for the embarrassment humanity had dealt them. But for now, in this moment, Earth stood free, defended not by superior weapons or overwhelming numbers, but by the ingenuity, courage, and unbreakable determination of a species that refused to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed absolutely certain. Sarah Cade returned home a hero, though she never quite accepted the title, insisting always that the true victory belonged to every person who had worked, fought, and sacrificed during those desperate months. Marcus Chen continued his research, knowing that Earth would need to be ready for whatever came next, understanding better than most that the peace they had won was fragile and temporary. And across the galaxy, word began to spread among the many species who lived in fear of the Krythar Dominion, whispered stories of a small, stubborn world that had faced the might of an empire that had never known defeat, and had somehow, against every possible odd, made its final move and won. Earth had lost its fleet. Earth had faced annihilation. But Earth had not fallen, and in the quiet aftermath of the greatest battle in human history, a new hope began to spread, not just across one small planet, but across the stars themselves, carried by every species who now understood, for the first time, that the Krythar Dominion could indeed be beaten. Humanity had made its final move, and humanity had survived.